Inside Analysis is your source of information and insight about how to make the most of this exciting new era. Learn more at InsideAnalysis.com.
InsideAnalysis.com.
And now, here's your host, Eric Kavanagh.
All right, folks, welcome to the future indeed. Your host here, Eric Kavanagh. 2022 is upon us, folks. Inside Analysis, the only coast-to-coast radio show all about the information economy. We're just rocking and rolling, folks, and I'm very excited to have our first guest of the year with us, a gentleman named Dan Leffave, the systems guy, as he's called in his email blasts. Leffave Coaching is his company, and we're going to talk about new roles, new business models, new ways of doing business, and why it's important to keep a positive attitude. And so I'll start off by promoting Dan's email newsletter I got on years ago, somehow, some way. And it's always positive. He is always throwing out good ideas and interesting thoughts about how you can challenge yourself and kind of understand where you're going and all the importance of mindset, quite frankly. And I thought to myself before the show, you know, if you really get down to brass tacks, a positive attitude is like a critical success factor for business. If you're a business owner, if you're the one who runs the shop, then you must maintain a positive attitude. And if you don't, you're not going to be in business too long, or you sure won't be having fun. So we're going to talk with that topic today, front and center. And we're booking the year right now. So if you want to come on one of these shows, send me an email, info@insideanalysis.com. It comes straight to me. And with that, let's bring in Dan Leffave. Dan, tell us a bit about yourself and the Systems Guy, your newsletter, and what you do for a living.
Certainly. Well, thanks for having me, Eric. Well, you know what? I guess systems were put inside of me or bred inside of me some way, shape, or form in my life. So fortunately for me, I started a business with my brother in the late 90s, and we built a wireless telecom business to $1 million, and I had no clue what I was doing. But thankfully, I sprained my thumb out in the field 2 weeks into the job. But
Wow.
but you know what? I ended up in the office, and I ended up just setting up systems, doing all the business organization, foundations, and so on. I was in my 20s. I really didn't know what I was doing, but anyway, and then I went through this whole track of working for different companies, and all in wireless telecom. And I did project management. Wasn't certified for that, but I figured it out. I did real estate negotiations, again, for wireless telecom. And then I ended up working for Canada's largest landlord, and they gave me their portfolio to manage, and I took it to 25 million. And so, again, I had no idea what I was doing in each of these environments, but you know, putting systems together and implementing solutions is just my thing. Some people say they're problem solvers. I'm a solution finder. So
That's cool.
You know, and systems come to me naturally. I don't necessarily know all the systems, but I come up with the strategy that's required to solve the problem, and then the system is implemented thereafter.
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, that sounds like a fun job. And you just went out there and did it. And I'd throw this out there to our listening audience. That's the number one success factor, I think, is just going out there and doing something. Maybe you sprain your thumb, maybe you trip and fall, maybe you drop the ball a couple of times. We learn from mistakes. I mean, smart people, everyone really does, but smart people really deeply learn from mistakes and from errors in judgment and so forth. And if you're like me, you'll feel bad about it for a long time and probably shouldn't. But the bottom line is that you can learn a great deal from making mistakes or from encountering negative scenarios. The key is to really be honest with yourself about what you're witnessing, and don't be too hard on yourself, but be just hard enough on yourself to know when you made a mistake and then find a way to correct it, right? And I know today we wanted to talk a bit about mindset, so maybe that's the segue right now. We were discussing before the show the importance of making changes to your business, which will require changes in process and changes perhaps in personnel, resources, different technologies you might use. But most importantly is up here is changing your mindset about what you're doing and how you're doing. Is that about right, Dan?
Yes. Well, here's the thing. When we make any change, like let's say somebody makes a change with their health, because that's relatable. If they make a change with their health, it takes their mind a little time to catch up. Right. So that's the way we have to approach things. We have to think about, if we're going to, deal with this new economy, which is basically everybody's virtual, and nobody wants to go into the office anymore, as far as I know.
Right.
So then, if you're virtual, then okay. So then, what are the qualities of a good employee, or somebody that's reliable in your company, that is dependable, they're accountable, they show up, they perform at a high level. What are the qualities and characteristics of somebody like that, and how do you manage that, and how do you keep control of it? Because performance is a moving target. So
Right.
it all depends on people's emotions and whether they slept well, or whether if the project's too challenging or maybe boring. There's all these factors involved. So how do you get a grasp on that with this new world and this new way of doing business?
Right. Yeah, that's a hard thing to do. And now here's the exciting part from my perspective. 10, especially 15 years ago, if you wanted to start a business, you really had to build everything up from the ground. And that includes your servers, your data center, your de facto data center, if it's just a few boxes, for example. But all the machinery that runs your operation, you got to stand it all up, load all the software, do all that stuff. These days, with software as a service, you can just rent what you need. So you can test out your business model on a pretty low budget. I'd say a couple, $3,000 is enough to get you started with a handful of tools for marketing. For example, I do a lot of email marketing. You do that as well, social media marketing, et cetera. And you're off to the races. So I'm guessing from your perspective, it's a lot easier to help clients find a way to do things because there are so many different options about how to do it. And all these services are relatively inexpensive. But what do you think?
Well, I think what you're talking about is automation. So if you can automate certain practices, and I do help my clients figure out which things they need to automate, because you can tell they have huge frustration and probably, very little income as a result of the service that they're providing, or the type of service. As an example, I had a design company that was producing business cards. 10% of the revenue, high frustration. So right away, there was no question. It was like, well, do you need that? Is that, or can you switch that over to something else and provide higher value service and get paid more and not be so frustrated? Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing. So, that wasn't necessarily an automation, but that was a cutting out of something that was totally worthless and very frustrating. Like you could tell right away, like on a scale of 1 to 10, it was, I think, 8 or 9.
Wow.
But if you can automate certain things, which it's easy to automate today, like I'm not even that technical, but I have so many automations that are working for me. And if I don't know how to do it, I can hire somebody for virtually,
Right.
For almost nothing. So comparatively, but, so just getting that set up, that's going to streamline your business so much. And then the next, like there's different levels. So let's say that's the first level, automate, get things automated. So then that streamlines things and gets back time, because that's our most valuable asset. People don't realize that. They don't think about it on a daily basis, but if they can get back time, and that's actually the first thing that I do when I work with somebody, I start getting them back time right away, because I know they're going to say to me, I'm too busy, or I didn't take that action or do that tactic that I said I would. And it's because something got in the way. So right away I find them, and it's fast, like maybe 10 hours in a week. Like it's instantaneous that they soon realize that they're wasting time on things like business cards or maybe watching useless media, and Netflixing or whatever, right? So but get back time, and then they can devote more time and attention to building the business, because that's going to fuel their relationships, fuel their health, fuel their lifestyle. It's going to provide them all of that. The critical factor here is to automate first, get back some time, and then work on the business development.
Yeah, this is good information, I think. And you hit upon one of my soapbox issues, and I've had it for years now. And I keep saying I'm going to write a book, so I got to do it. I'll do it this year, I promise, on morale and the critical importance of morale, not just in business, but in life. But we'll focus on business for the purpose of this show. When the morale of your team is high, good things are going to happen. When it's low, bad things are going to happen. You can have all the money, resource, even time in the world, and if morale is low, you're not going to get good results. So then the question becomes, all right, how do we boost morale? And it's not just more money or more free time. It is a cultural thing for sure. You have to support your team, as I think you've already implied in this conversation so far. But there are little small things along the way that cause friction, and those friction points cause frustration. When that frustration builds, that's when morale goes down. So the story you told of the guy who's doing business cards and it was 10% of the business and it was just driving him nuts. Well, that's breaking the morale. So you have to identify what are the friction points. Do we really need them? And a lot of times you don't. So, I mean, these are fairly simple things, but you look at what you're doing, and I always say you want to find that Venn diagram of the things that you like to do, that you're good at doing, and that can make you money. And if you find that sweet spot in the middle of those three, you're going to do great. What do you think?
Absolutely. When you talk about morale, I think of, what do you have to manage that? What systems, or as I call it, code of honor or standards, do you have to manage that? Because if you don't have something to police people, guess what? When emotions are high, intelligence is low. and people make irrational decisions based on how they're feeling, and it may not be the right one for your business or for your clients. And so, how do you manage that? How do you get control of that and grasp it? Well, like I was just alluding to, if you had some sort of code of honor, a set of standards, and when you have those list of standards, that's the level that people have to play by. And right. There's no going around it. There's no like I had a bad day or something like that or whatever. It's simply, these are the standards, and if something goes wrong, you refer to the standards. And so if you have a team meeting, let's say, for example, and somebody does something that's out of the ordinary and messed up, then you have that dialogue, and it might be, let's say, a code 8, and you say, well, hey, Tim, that was a code 8. I'm sure you realize that, right? How are we going to solve this as a team now, right? So it's a team effort. It's not like them against you or the team, right? It's team effort. So how will we solve this problem that came up? And now Tim's going to take accountability. He's going to take responsibility. And if Tim keeps doing this, and there's a motto that says that how people do anything is how they do everything. If Tim keeps repeating this because of that. Yeah, well, and it's true. I've seen it many times. But, if Tim keeps repeating this behavior, the code is going to do the policing, and he is going to check out. He's not going to be able to stand the heat. He can't, he won't be able to handle the humiliation. So he will leave and find another team or another business to go to. So it's a great way of managing your people, but having them be self-accountable, self-responsible, self-conscious, and not having to, be the boss or the father figure or the mother figure, right? and pushing people's buttons, because that's not going to work, and it never does. I've been a manager before and had all sorts of people reporting to me. So if something goes wrong, and they come to me and they start blaming and complaining, well, if I don't have standards, which I didn't at that time, how am I going to really handle that? I have to then dig in. But, if you have standards that manage every aspect of your business, and it doesn't have to be very, very many, maybe it's only 12 or 15 standards, and those standards will ensure that people perform at a high level, take responsibility, are accountable, and show up. And then when you have a team like that, then you can scale much easier. Otherwise, guess what happens? Emotions are high, intelligence is low, people aren't predictable, and you don't have a predictable system to manage them. And if you don't have that in place, then guess what? People just drift and do whatever feels right, and things can go wrong. And so the bigger the company, the bigger the organization, the tighter the standards need to be. That's the rule of thumb. Things need to be tighter.
I like your point about complaining and blaming and all these other things, because those are definitely red flags for someone not having done what they were supposed to have done and looking for excuses. I mean, I know myself, I run this company, so the buck stops with me, and I do have to take ownership of whatever happens, really. And there's a certain point at which if someone isn't performing and they're really not doing what they're supposed to be doing, at a certain point, that becomes the manager's fault, right? It's not the employee's fault. If the employee just can't get the job done, then it's time for that employee to change jobs or change roles or just, go somewhere else. And that could be difficult, right? But you do want to know that everyone is committed and involved, and then you have to take action when you have to take action, right?
Absolutely. And the thing is, you want that high commitment. You want the highest possible commitment, because nobody wants to get a call one day. Like, I'll give you an example, which not a great one, but it was my brother. We expanded to the US. He opened an office in Illinois, and he was working there. He's building all these towers for AT&T and big companies like that. Next thing you know, he gets a call, and it's the crew, and they're all friends. And they said the keys are in the truck. We packed it up. We're leaving. I don't know exactly what the story was, what went wrong, but they just all left. So they're, and he's holding the bag. He doesn't have a team of people to build these sites, and so he's left figuring it out on his own. And basically, came back to Canada with his tail between his legs, and and tried to fix things. But those kinds of situations can be avoided when you build a strong team. And you have to reverse engineer it, in fact. And I've gone into companies where they've had weak links on their team. And we were talking about it before the show, but there's a model. It's called the victim loop and intention loop. In the victim loop, that's where people blame, complain, deny, run, hide. Those are the qualities and characteristics of somebody who's a victim and who doesn't take responsibility. And then in the intention loop is that where people recognize, take action, be self-accountable and responsible. That's being intentional. So as you can probably guess, everybody would love to have a business that it has people that live by intention and not blaming, complaining, and denying, and lying, and running. But with this example with Brad, he had two people on his team. All we did was compare his 3-year vision of his business to his current business now, right. And there was 2 people that were not going to make it. And,
wow.
So yeah, in the end, one person left, and the other person got a second try, and they left, and they had to go. So
wow, yeah, and I mean, I think that the key here is chemistry. Right. There's always something to be said for chemistry in any relationship, business, personal, marriage, whatever. If there's good chemistry, good things are going to happen. And it could be a difficult thing to ascertain or perhaps describe, but it should be pretty visible just by virtue of the results. Right. I mean, if things are going well, it is good to examine, all right, why are things going well? Or at least what is our reasonable hypothesis for why things are going well? And same thing, things are going bad, right? You want to be able to understand. And information and honesty is central to all that. Don't touch that dial, folks. We'll be right back. You're listening to Inside Analysis.
Welcome back to Inside Analysis. Here's your host, Eric Kavanagh.
Take us to the future.
All right, folks, take us to the future indeed. Here we are, show 1 of 2022 on Inside Analysis. Your host here, Eric Kavanagh, talking to Dan Leffave, the systems guy of Leffave Coaching. And Dan, when I was in my teens and 20s, we used to always joke about these self-help books. And it was the early days of motivational speakers. There was a guy, I can't remember his name, but he was all about the power of positive thinking. And again, when I was in my teens, I was like, oh, that's silly, et cetera. And I got older and I started realizing some of these guys have a lot of really positive things to say. I mean, really impressive. And there was one guy I was listening to probably 15 years ago who had this just great advice. He just said very simply, don't look where you don't want to go. And he told a story of when he was driving down the highway somewhere in the hinterlands in the winter, and there was this curve coming up and a huge snowbank past the curve, and he's like, oh man, that snowbank, oh no. And sure enough, he just tried to avoid it and went boom right into it. And his point was, don't look where you don't want to go. In part because it's one of my favorite bands is a band called Modest Mouse. They're from out in the West Coast, and they've got a fairly new song out right now where the opening line is, hello, here's the worst part. We are reflections of our own thoughts. And he says, hello, here's the best part. We are driven by our own thoughts. And his point is that the thought starts everything, whether it's a business or a relationship or a journey somewhere. It's always a thought that starts that. And so if you can control your thoughts better and stay positive and stay focused, that's going to be good for business. You have to be realistic about things, but stay focused and do what you want to do. Because if you enjoy your job, then it's not really like work. It's not like going to work for someone else where it's a really hard job. For example, if you're doing what you enjoy, and you can make money doing almost anything these days, but you have to stay focused and don't look where you don't want to go. What do you think, Dan?
Well, just on the idea of not looking where you don't want to go, definitely fighter pilots don't do that. They're not looking the rearview mirror too often unless there's a bogey out there, so, right? They are looking forward. They're moving fast, like I can imagine. But we do not ever look in the rearview mirror when we're going that fast. And so if you're going to move fast, you can't look in your rearview mirror too often. You might look back just to learn and see where the breakdowns are, but honestly, you don't look back too often. So yeah, you definitely need to keep your focus on where you're going and use your thoughts effectively. But I'm so careful about how I use my thoughts. So much so that I have things all over my house. I have affirmations and things plastered everywhere so that I can use my thoughts effectively. If I go into the bathroom, there's one in the mirror. Just take a dry erase marker. But the idea is this: if your thoughts are going to compound and produce a result, which they do, there's no question about it. I mean, if you think about the education system, everything that you learned up to a certain point gets you a degree or certifies you for something. But without taking those steps and practicing and doing all the thought work that was required, you won't end up with that. So thoughts do compound just like interest compounds, but people don't think of them like that. So what do? And this isn't against anybody. Everybody does this. They all think in reverse. They criticize themselves. There's self-doubt. There's worry. There's fear. There's all sorts of traumas that have taken place over the past century that have been passed down. So those are the types of things that occupy people's minds. And I've heard stats about 80% of our thoughts are going against ourselves. So basically our own human nature is going against our goals, our dreams, our aspirations. And, and we don't recognize that. And I'll explain it the way that I was taught. I mentioned earlier that Bob Proctor was my mentor. He's a great personal development guru. He taught us that our mind has two parts, and one of it is the hard drive. The hard drive is our subconscious mind. It stores all of our memories, experiences, habits, practices. Everything gets stored there. And unless we take control of it, because you've probably heard of the saying that until we become conscious of our unconscious and manage it better, I'm just paraphrasing it, that it'll control us and it'll become our destiny. So How do we control our destiny? With our thoughts. Just let's say you had a plan to go to dinner today. So there's probably a whole strew of thoughts that are leading up to that, except you don't think of it that way. So there's some. Let's use something a little bit bigger. A vacation. So it's a big vacation. Maybe it's a month in Bali. So if you're planning for that vacation, there's a lot of thoughts that are going to come into play just to get you to get there. But people don't think of it like that. So then what if you took your goal and started thinking about the steps that you would take and the tactics and the kind of milestones you would need to hit, because we can always connect the dots looking backwards. So why not manifest the dots that we want to hit moving forwards, and then use our thoughts to get there. And the reason why I mentioned about affirmations earlier is because when you have odd moments, like going to the washroom or walking, you're in your kitchen or something like that, these are the kinds of things, like if they're in your presence, in your environment. And there's a great book, Atomic Habits by James Clear, talks about that. Your environment can condition you. So if you set up your environment so that you can win, guess what? You have a greater chance. And then you can use your thoughts more effectively and they will compound. You get the results you want. And then, you can say to the people around you, can say, see, my thoughts did compound and I got what I wanted.
This is very interesting. I mean, I think a lot about this stuff all the time. I was a philosophy major way back 1,000 years ago in college, but I love this this way you describe using your thoughts, allowing them to compound, right? So you're building a foundation in your mind of what the business is going to look like. And yeah, you got to go and do the workflow and all the stuff that gets the job done. But if you strategically use your thoughts as assets, that's when you really get somewhere, right?
Exactly. And they will compound whether you like it or not. that's the
Well
scary
put.
part, right? Well, that's the thing. Like, you're going to get whatever you thought about, whether you like it or not. And so if you're getting results or having problems, like problems are clear indicators that you're thinking in the wrong direction and thinking
Interesting.
in reverse. So if there's a lot of problems, a lot of issues, a lot of complexities, a lot of challenges, a lot of headaches, a lot of frustrations, those are clear indications that the thoughts leading up to those situations are not in alignment with your intentions and with what you want.
Interesting. That's it. I've thought about this myself too, that problems or serious troubles are signs, right? It's not that you're going to have challenges in any business, but it shouldn't feel bad, I guess, is one way to look at it, right? The challenge should be just part of the game and should be interesting and fun, as opposed to depressing or frustrating or debilitating. And that's where you get the power of the mind, right? If you're frustrated, that's why I go back to morale and friction points leading to frustration. And that kind of frustration, that kind of a bad attitude in a company from an employee or certainly from the CEO is like a cancer. I mean, it'll just take it down over time. I thought just the other day about what's happening in social media, and not to get too far off track, but geez, you mentioned the self-doubts that people experience. And I studied Shakespeare when I was in college, and in the play Othello, you have this character Iago, who is always just kind of whispering in Othello's ear and trying to scare him about things and trying to get him worried about things. And folks, that's a bad sign. I got to tell you, anytime I encounter someone in the work environment who says something to me, or listen, you should be careful about this guy, and this person is bad, and that person is bad, I'm like, I'm going to watch out for you first and foremost, and then I'll listen to what you said about these other people too, because I try to take information in, right? But those types of forces in your organization are destructive. And if you find it, if someone just complaining all the time gets everyone else complaining, you got to tell that person to hit the road, man, right?
Yeah, or give them an opportunity to clean up, and if they don't, then they're gone.
Right.
But I think of it like this, because there's always contrasting experiences in this world. I think our world is binary by nature. So I think that we have contrasting experiences. And I think that what you just mentioned earlier, we either have faith-based thinking or fear-based. And so if we have fear-based thinking, then we are not likely to move ahead and take risks. And that causes a lot of issues with our potentiality. Try to stay positive when you have fear running around your head. You're going to
Right.
be limited by that, and it's like having your foot on the gas pedal, but your left foot's on the brake. Just
Right.
you know,
Sure. I mean, that's such a good point, and I'll throw one of my favorite cliches over to you. I'm a big fan of cliches. I love this one. You never hear it too much, but it's a good one. It says, well begun is half done, right? So if you get off on the right foot, if you have the right mindset and you know where you're going, you know what you're trying to accomplish, you're basically halfway done compared to situations where you don't really know what you're doing. You don't really know what you want. You're just kind of meandering out there. You could have all kinds of problems. So, but it does take time to think these things through. And especially these days, because again, to your point earlier, all sorts of stuff can be automated. So there are lots of parts of the business that were tedious and mundane and painful that now really don't have to be nearly as bad. So you can kind of skate past a lot of that stuff, but there's always going to be something important to tackle at any given time. And frankly, maybe we'll pivot to that for the next segment and a half or so. Knowing what to do now, like how to prioritize your time. I was talking to a gentleman yesterday who is very experienced in the data field, and he jokes that every day he checks his phone first to see, okay, are there any fires I have to put out, and checks emails. Is someone freaking out? It's because it's code red basically in this one project that they were working on, and then he starts kind of tackling other stuff. Well, that's obviously, a very intense situation. You want to get ahead of that ideally, so that you're not just fighting off, what a good friend of mine calls the tyranny of urgency, right? And it can be easy to get behind that 8 ball in any given business. I mean, your brother was behind that 8 ball when these people just up and left. And so now he's at the mercy of urgency, of needing to do things quickly. So you got to cut your losses or just figure something out, but make the hard decisions, get over that hump, and then move on, right?
Absolutely. Well, the thing is, like, there's two different perspectives. Like, if you can see the signs, like if there's telltale signs, which typically there are, when things are not going right, there's telltale signs, there's indicators. And we have to be aware of those indicators, and we should be recording the performance or the breakdowns. And that's what I encourage my clients to do. I love the system. It's called the 12-week year. There's a whole book on it, and I've studied it. But I created a system to manage these types of situations so that you know exactly what you want and where you're going. So we don't start off by saying, okay, well, what's your goal? What do you want? We start out by, going far out into the future, getting really broad, going 10 years out and saying, okay, well, what would you like to have if you could have it 10 years from now? And then we take the 20%, we use the 80-20 rule to take 20% out of that. If you got only 20% of those things, which would you take with you if you could do that in 5 years? And then water that down, break that down to 3 years, then 1 year. And then once you're down to 1 year, you only have a handful of goals left. And then you decide which one is the most critical and highest priority and put that at the head of the list. And then make a 12-week plan to totally go distraction free, focused, intention, very intense. In fact, I will tell you, it's sort of like running a marathon, and I've run marathons. But it's very intense, but it's really focused and dialed in. The tactics are very specific. You're measuring performance. And if there's any breakdowns, that's where you do the fixing, because there's always going to be breakdowns. There's no question about that. There will be breakdowns, but if you're not fixing breakdowns, then how do you know how do you know where to make course corrections? Right. But just getting that dialed in clarifies the intention, clarifies the steps that are going to need to be taken, measure performance with accountability, and then take incremental steps. But every once in a while, maybe every couple of weeks, take a look back, see where the improvements, where you came from, the shifts. Just a little bit, not a lot, because you don't want to spend too much time looking at the past, because it sounds like you study a lot of similar books, but if you're not thinking about your future, you're only reflecting on what you know, which is a reflection of your past, which means your future is predictable.
Interesting.
Which is pointless. Like, why keep reflecting on the past and reproducing that, because that's not going to get you into a new version of yourself. It's not going to cause a future version of yourself to emerge. You won't have a new identity, a new self-image. And that's ultimately that's what happens. Everybody needs to make that shift.
Yeah, and I like this. I like that vision, by the way. You've got a methodology here. Start with a 10-year plan. What do you really want? Down to 5, 3, 2, 1. Then you got 1 year. What's your main priority going to be? And then you're doing what they do in the development world of a sprint, a 12-week sprint, as you call it, 3 months, basically, or just under 3 months. Like, all right, let's really focus and try to tackle X. Like, let's try to build this minimum viable product, for example. In the development world, it's like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, sometimes a week. They have these sprints, but they're good because they can give you something very tangible to focus on, to accomplish, to get done, and then allow yourself to move on to the next thing. And anyone in the working world knows when you accomplish your objectives, it feels good, man. It feels good. You feel good about yourself. It's a positive vision. It gets reinforced. Don't touch that dial. I'll be right back. You're listening to Inside Analysis.
Welcome back to Inside Analysis. Here's your host, Eric Kavanagh.
All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis, talking to Dan Leffave, the systems guy of Leffave Coaching up there in Toronto, Canada. A lot of experience. He works with digital agencies and other people, I'm sure, kind of helping them plan out their processes, their systems, and do better in their business. And we were talking before the break about the 12-week year. I love this. I love these 12-week sprints. And in a virtual world, we got people all over the place. So, like, I'll tell you one of my tricks that I've just kind of learned over the years that I do, and it's partially just because of my personality. I'll hire someone, get them to do some things, give them specific tasks. And then when everything kind of lightens up, I'm curious to see just what do they decide to work on? Like, what do they do when there's nothing else to do? Is it play around? Is it start some new project? Is it come up with some new idea or ask some questions? And that's a very telling moment, because if they choose to kind of dig in and go deeper and ask questions and say, hey, I'm done with this. What about that? Or should I help with this? Or should I help with that? That's a good sign. But people who don't do that, and then I've recognized a lot of these pantomimes, you could call them, I guess. One is they crack jokes about the job, or they try to denigrate you, or they try to make you feel bad for asking them to do things, or all these are all little red flags for someone who just doesn't want that job, which is fine. I think people really do need to be honest with themselves about when they don't want to do something. Because if you don't want to do the job, don't do the job, man, for sure. Like, just find some other job, because there are so many things you can do. Like, the possibilities are endless these days, but you do have to get outside of your comfort zone, figure something out, do the Venn diagram as I suggested, and kind of take it from there. But I think that you've hit a lot of really good points, and I took some notes here. You mentioned habit gravity. I love that concept, habit gravity. It's, old habits are hard to break, right? They die hard. What's some advice that you can give folks for how they can break habit gravity and get it into the stratosphere?
Well, first of all, habit gravity is when you're trying to climb a mountain. Let's say Everest, for example. You're trying to climb Everest. You just need to get to the first base camp, right? That's the objective, right? You'll think about getting the next one and so on. And I've had friends who have climbed Everest, so there's a ton of preparation leading up to it. So you don't just, haphazardly,
right.
Strap on a backpack and head over and start climbing. So there's a lot of effort and time and energy spent just getting ready for it. But as you climb, the gravitational pull is there, the habit gravity, and it's basically calling on you, come back to base camp, come back, it's safe here, it's secure, you don't need to risk your life, it's cozy, right? And, I'm sure people have these kinds of thoughts after a while, especially if they, step around or go through some crevices where they can literally die.
Yeah.
So you have this, think of habits like this. It's like an elastic band. You're trying to change the habit, you're changing, you keep pulling on the elastic band. But if you don't persist long enough so that it snaps, like sort of cracks and breaks, let's say, not snaps back into place, it will snap back. Right. It will pull you back down to where you were. And unless there's a shift in here, because it is a mindset thing, you have to see yourself differently. So that's self-image. You also have to have a different perception of yourself, like a new identity, like an identity of, let's say, a CEO versus a manager. Totally different identities.
Right.
There's totally different responsibilities and capabilities required, and a lot of decision making, and there's probably a lot of fear and trepidation in there unless the person is really confident. But coming back to what you were saying, to get really high quality people, it stems from the top down. So character traits of the leader need to be part of the team. That needs to be part of the team culture. Right. And, birds of the same feather flock together. So if you, have a leader who's really forward thinking, forward moving, very action oriented, risk taker potentially, those are the kinds of qualities that are required in the team. Otherwise, there's going to be a meltdown or there's going to be a breakdown. So those are the kinds of things that are critical. And there is a tool, by the way, well, maybe not necessarily a tool, but a system that does this. It tells you how people's minds are wired. It's called iworkzone.com, if you want to check that out. But it's called letter I, workzone.com. And Jeff is the founder. And just to give you some insight, they're binary questions. So you cannot mess with the system. It's not a personality test. It's binary questions. Like, do you want to study law books or sell cars? Neither, but you got to pick one.
Wow.
So the binary questions, but it tells you how your mind is wired so that an employer can hire people based on their deepest, darkest secrets and their deepest capabilities.
Right. That's a good point. And we are at such an interesting turning point in our world, I guess, right now. We've talked about it for years, like the gig economy, for example. You look at millennials, they don't have the same idea of career as folks our age do, where we want to get a good job and excel, et cetera. It's more like, oh, I'll just do different things and kind of patch together enough to make money, but do what I want to do, basically. And we've had like the Myers-Briggs and other kinds of tests over the years, which they all have some kind of value. What you mentioned right now sounds very interesting, iWorkZone.com, because it helps you figure out what you want to do. Sometimes it's hard to figure out what you want to do, and you have to start doing stuff to just see, was that fun? Was it not fun? Did I like it? I think there's actually a comedian, Bill Burr, who's pretty funny. He figured out the secret to happiness. He said it goes like this. If someone asks you, hey, do you want to do X? And you don't want to do it, say no. And if someone says, hey, do you want to do Y? And you do want to do it, say yes. It's a bit simplistic, but his point was very well taken, that if you want to do something, say so, right? Ask and you shall receive. And if you don't want to do it, say so. Make sure it's clear and understand in the context, in your job, you may have to do things you don't want to do, but still, it's really important to know, like, just pay attention to your own emotions, right? Where are you right now? Are you happy? Are you sad? To me, happiness is the ultimate metric. If you're happy, then things are going well. If you're not happy, something's wrong and you have to focus on it. What do you think?
Absolutely. Well, you know what? You're mentioning something that is a core part of my business, which I believe that the answers are in the questions that we ask ourselves. And there's some great books I've studied on this topic, but the key factor is this. When we have a problem, we automatically start asking questions of ourselves. And there's a part of our mind called the reticular activating system, the RAS. And the reticular activating system has a job, solve problems. So we start asking ourselves, like I'll give you a live example. Years ago, I was driving with my mother, my teenager. We went in the ditch, not a deep ditch, but just in the ditch. And I'm thinking, oh, we got to get out of here, right? It's snowy, it's freezing, right? And guess what? In a few minutes' time, a Jeep pulled up, had a winch on the front, pulled us out. And I don't know if you'd say that was manifestation or luck or whatever the case may be, but you know what? There was a problem. We needed a solution. And so when you start thinking of the world around you in from that context, you start realizing that you have more power and control over what's going on, and you just don't let things happen. But the key here is, how do we get control over what's going on in our environment and not be reactive? As I learned from my mentor, Bob, he said that, reaction is when we are not thinking. Response is when we think. Like if we're going to respond,
Good.
that's with thought, right?
I like that.
Reaction is not. Reaction draws upon your experiences in your subconscious mind and instantly floods your conscious mind, and you react. And there are times when you wonder why you did that, and and you might regret it too, because you might end up with a bloody nose or something. But because you reacted, right? And then you're like, oh man, that was after the fact in emergency with a broken nose, you're wondering why you did that. Well, that's the self-realization comes in when you have something go wrong, and then you have an awakening. But that's the thing. How do we respond better? How do we manage our emotions better? And I think the word is, how do we regulate them better?
Interesting.
Because emotions are always there. They're always working and always happening. I see it. I mentioned to you, I have 3 boys. They're happy, they're playing, they're fun. Everything's going good. Joy, 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 excitement, right? And I know a crash is coming. I'm not predicting it, but I know one's coming, because what goes up must come down, and vice versa.
Right.
And so after playing a little bit for with the excitement and the joy and everything, there's usually something that goes wrong, and there's a crash. And then there's crying, which is sadness, right?
Someone sprains an ankle, or it's all fun and games till someone gets an eye poked out, right?
Someone swung an arm incorrectly and hit the other one in the face.
Yeah, that'll do it. No, that's a good point. And you kind of, so I was going to mention, and maybe we'll do this for the podcast bonus section, the first great manager I ever had who was amazing. I'll say his name, Peter Quinn. He was the general manager at the Data Warehousing Institute when I worked there in 2005. And he was such a good manager. I was like, oh my goodness, that's what a good manager is. I had no idea that there were people like this in the world. I just genuinely had not encountered someone who would demonstrate actual caring for you, the employee, the person on his team. I remember the first time I finished a call, my first meeting with him up in Seattle, and the end, he's like, what can I do for you? I was like, did someone walk into the room? Who's he talking to? He's talking to me? Holy crap. Well, folks, podcast bonus segment up next. You're listening to Inside Analysis.